All right. Welcome to our first installation of Keep It a Buck. We're your co-hosts, David and David.
Yes.
We'll take you through economic events, different implications of policy, both in America, how that affects American citizens, and more broadly on an international plane.
And this will be kind of our first installation of our roundtable segment, but we do plan on having even more business and entrepreneurship type content with interviews, so you guys should stay tuned for that. But for now, I think it's important that we discuss kind of the most broad and important things that I think are going on in our economy right now, which recently, if you guys didn't know, the US economy has actually slowed down or decelerated to a growth pace of 1.1% in this most recent quarter from January through March. And yeah, I think we should discuss it. Like, what do you think about that? What are some of the causes that we could attribute to an event like that?
Well, I think it definitely makes sense, especially coming out of a pandemic. We had insane growth, insane amount of money being printed, and now we're sort of feeling the after effects of that. I think it definitely came slower than expected, and there was a lot of talk of a recession, I think maybe starting around a year ago. But I think now we're really seeing the effects of the Federal Reserve's rate hikes.
Yeah.
And we're seeing unemployment on the rise, huge tech cut in terms of jobs,
Yeah.
which I know actually started to affect a lot of recent graduates. So as kids come out of college, the positions that they would take, they're now competing with people who worked at firms for many years.
Right, and just for some specific numbers, actually, in Disney and Amazon, this past week they had a combined 34,000 job cuts that they're projecting to expect over the coming months, actually, which is really big. And in addition, if you guys know Dropbox, the CEO of that company, Drew Houston, announced that the company would cut 16% of its workforce, or the equivalent of 500 employees, both due to the stagnation in the economy, but also, interestingly enough, due to recent AI developments. So how do you think that could impact other tech companies at large? Because as we know, ChatGPT and other AIs are coming up. They're only going to keep getting stronger and stronger. Is this the kind of trend that we're going to see going forward?
That's interesting. I mean, I think there's always a debate of which types of jobs can AI take, where does the human element sort of come out of it. The huge bubble that we saw in terms of employment was more so in the tech industry, right? Just like I heard from Dropbox and all that. I do think that artificial intelligence can play a role in those workers' jobs, but I think that the cut is more so due just to the fact that our growth is slowing down as opposed to artificial intelligence. Because we still need people to train AI, to work with AI.
Absolutely.
I think that's going to open up an industry of its own in artificial development. So some of the people who are losing jobs to AI, I believe that they will in fact transfer into development of AI, because a lot of those skills are transferable. Like you mentioned, people working in the tech industry, I'm sure that there's some sort of cross application there.
Right, and I mean, as you had said, a lot of these cuts, this isn't just because of AI, this isn't just Dropbox doing this, but I think it's still an interesting thing to note and something to look out for. But even if you draw a parallel to a company like Twitter, when Elon took over, I don't remember the exact number, but I know he cut a huge portion of their workforce just because the company was so overbloated. And when you start going into parts like times like this where there's economic stagnation, you start to see what companies are overbloated, how many of these employees are really being productive. So it'll be interesting to see how that trend continues. But just to circle back to kind of our initial points about the causes for what's been going on. Yes, we had the pandemic, and yes, our government tried to inject some money into the economy, which whether you like it or don't like it, I think we can objectively look at that and say now that's put us in probably a worse position than we were in before, because due to the rising inflation that we've been trying to combat with interest rates, now we have kind of a double problem. Not only is the economy stagnating, but we're also going to start to experience high inflation, which I already said, but the high interest rates, this could have long-term effects on other markets within our economy. Specifically, I've been looking at the housing market because, if you actually analyze the data behind some of the trends in the housing market and how they coincide with recessions in our economy, times where there's not much construction going on and developers don't want to build, it's hard for people to buy because they don't want to take out mortgages with these rates. It typically coincides with big recessions. And right now, we've been kind of held up by employment within the housing market, which is kind of a pillar of our economy, is specifically in residential housing, employment in that sector. But if you start to look at the amount of building permits that people are taking out, it's dropping rapidly, and we're kind of still relying on the units under construction, on projects that were started before all of these rising interest rates started to happen. So I think within the next few months, honestly, and we're probably already starting to see some impacts, we could see huge problems start within the housing market, and that could set off another wave of a big recession.
Right. And interestingly enough, it's not just in terms of new construction. If I was looking at some data from real estate agencies, and they measure the amount of inventory they have and the amount of months that it would take them to sell that inventory. So even with existing properties, they're filling up so quickly that they have around a month, typically a month to 2 months left, whereas the healthy range would be 4 to 6 months of inventory. So even the people who are living in older properties, they're deciding to settle down, especially with COVID, moving out of cities, moving into suburbs, and not wanting to move around so much. So there's clearly a slowdown there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this might be, I really hope it's not, but it does seem like the US might start to lose its footing in terms of being like the biggest and the best global player, with what we noticed with BRICS, the new currency that's being developed. Can you speak to that a little bit?
100%, yeah. So it's definitely a good transition, especially considering America is, I think economically we can say, in a weaker position than it was before the pandemic. But just to recap, if you guys weren't familiar with it, we're currently viewing immense unrest and a lot of civil tension within Russia due to the war in Ukraine. Just a lot of opposition, a lot of misinformation being thrown around on both sides. So BRICS was a union, right? Union's the word for it, of nations. They consisted of Brazil, Argentina, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, India.
Did you mention China?
India,
South Africa.
Right. So just a bunch of big players.
A coalition, you could call it.
A coalition, right. And they make up about 40% of the world's population. And recently they added a few more nations to them, so huge, and something like 25% of the world's GDP. And within that coalition of nations, they're now developing a new currency. And the goal of said currency is to actually compete with the American dollar.
Right.
So especially coming at a time like this where the dollar isn't probably in the strongest position in a stronger position as it could be in. I think that a global currency definitely could be challenging. But also, actually, I was looking at, if you consider the nations that are in this coalition, they're sort of like outliers. They have higher amounts of civil unrest, authoritarian governments.
Right.
So they sort of want to pull away from the American dollar because maybe they feel left out of that system, like politically with sanctions and stuff like that.
And not only that, a lot of these countries, China, India, Russia, they see themselves as kind of the next, new wave of regimes that will become these huge global players, which obviously some of them already are. Russia is kind of declining, but India has definitely stepped up recently. So they're looking at what's been going on right now, and they're saying, oh, the US wants to be the only, reserve currency of the world. What's stopping us from all coming together and doing our own thing? And, some competitors like China have proposed in the past a digital yuan to kind of usurp the dollar's place as like like I said, the global reserve currency. But this, I think, is a little bit different because these are really a coalition. It's not just one nation trying to push something together. It's a group of different countries coming together.
Right, and I think that what's so powerful is just how much of the population that they make up. And I think it really begs two questions. Firstly, do you think other nations outside of the coalition will begin to use that currency, or will it remain exclusive to them? And secondly, I think the pressing question with the rise of cryptocurrency is, will that currency be a physical currency or a digital currency?
That's interesting, yeah. So in terms of your first question, I think at least at first it's going to be difficult for them to get, at least some of the bigger nations to join in to what they're doing with BRICS, just because if you look at countries like China and Russia, especially Russia, like this is a country that's kind of an outlier right now, and they've been kind of cast aside and are being punished for what's going on with their war in Ukraine. And even China, like they're very big competitors to a lot of different big countries like the U.S., UK, whatever the case may be. I don't know if they would want to side themselves so quickly with this currency, but I mean, you never know what happens as things go forward. But yeah, speaking of digital currency, if you guys don't know, within our own country, we're actually going to have something called the Fed Now service, right?
Yeah, this was a big thing. I remember when it came out.
Yeah, it was. So essentially, the idea behind it, I believe, is to make transactions go through instantly. So kind of a competitor to PayPal, but being run by our central bank, right?
Right. So I'd say that, I mean, just to sort of zoom out of it, I'm sure you guys are familiar. There's interactions that we have with banks, but then banks have interactions with the Federal Reserve. So it's sort of like the three levels there. And this payment service, FedNow, would primarily expedite the payments in between banks and between banks and the Federal Reserve. So we refer to that as the velocity of money. Something like this would definitely increase the velocity of money, which could, I guess, help us in a period of stagnation.
But I will say, a lot of people I've been seeing have really big problems with this. I don't know necessarily if a country like ours, America, would end up, kind of stooping that low to do what some people think that they will, which is a lot of people think there might be some kind of social credit score implementation, or for example, because when you're giving the government control over your money and over your transactions, they can possibly in the future start to tell you, oh, we don't think that you should buy this. We don't think that you should buy this. And they can actually block your transactions, which I'm not saying that that will happen, but it is something to consider, how much power do we trust giving our government, and will they always have our best, interests at hand? Or can it be something where, they start to become more powerful and authoritarian in a way?
I mean, that is definitely always a concern, especially for citizens who are, I guess, like unfamiliar with it. It's a new thing. I honestly don't know. I think that especially, I mean, the Federal Reserve and the government don't necessarily work in cahoots, but they definitely supplement each other's actions. So I think that could be in the beginning, I don't know if there's going to be regulation that makes people uncomfortable, but it definitely would give government the ability to regulate.
Right, the ability. And that's really what people are concerned about, is just the ability that they would have, the power that we would be almost willingly giving them by supporting something like this.
I think that just for the sake of the benefits, I do think that the benefits do outweigh the costs here. Yeah, I think that what it would do in terms of expediting the payments made between banks, between the Federal Reserve, it would just make everything flow much faster. And obviously there's a security risk. There's a security risk in everything. But then again, like when we talk about AI, there's security risks. There's everything comes with risks.
I do wonder actually when it comes to AI. What new forms of AI will we start to see come out? Like I know ChatGPT has had some huge investments put into them through like companies like Microsoft, for example, and I think they're even actually being used by Bing currently as part of their search engine. But I wonder, like, will we start to see, like, for example, Google has I believe it's called Bard. That's their own version of an AI. Will we start to see this new trend? Because if you're a company like a really big company, for example, a Morgan Stanley of the world, an investment bank, do you feel comfortable using like one of these AIs like ChatGPT to help you with your work, or do you feel like it's not secure enough?
That's a good question, but I think it comes down in that case not so much to security as it is with accuracy and potentially dangerous answers. So I remember I read an article about Google specifically. They would rather invest in a startup that's pioneering AI than to really push their own artificial intelligence, because then that could sort of bring a bad name to the company if it's putting out offensive results, inaccurate results. And I guess when you look at, I mean, like let's take Goldman Sachs, for example, right? In the banking industry, I'm sure that artificial intelligence will be able to streamline some of the processes there. It is definitely a risk to use it. It's 100% a risk to use it. But I do think in terms of expediting work that would be more tedious for a human to do, I think at this stage it's less of a security risk than it is an issue with just accuracy of work. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's true. I could definitely see that, and it'll be interesting to see where things go going forward. We're kind of looking at it, we're really like, when Google and everything was just getting started in like the Y2K time period, and we had that whole .com bubble. Recently, we had the crypto bubble. Like, I'm just curious to see. I'm not even looking at this as what we have right now in terms of AI. We know that a technology like this will compound on itself and it'll get exponentially better. So where will we be in 5-10 years? I don't know. I don't think anybody necessarily has the answers to that. But that would also have huge impact on our economy and the kind of jobs that we see people doing. Like, it could take out a lot of busy work, but it would also probably bring us to new heights in terms of the types of efficiency and production that we'd be capable of.
100%. And also tying that back into FedNow, I guess, sort of jumping off of AI, what power would artificial intelligence have in regulating certain transactions? Would it be easier to act in terms of security, right? Would it be easier to flag unsecured transactions, to flag suspicious activity, and to stop illegal activity within the system, right? Things that can come back and slow down the system.
Yeah, and I think, I'm not sure if this is, what they're thinking necessarily, but, from the IRS's perspective, how easy is it now to catch tax evaders when you're going to be able to see every transaction that they send? Because, maybe before people were getting money in Bitcoin or Ethereum, whatever the case may be, in like crypto, but now if everything is going to be going through this FedNow service and they really try to push it, they're going to see every transaction that everybody makes.
Right. And I think that FedNow, we could probably parallel that with SWIFT, right? So I wonder if, I know this is coming from the central bank, but will other central banks start implementing their own sort of service parallel to FedNow? Because I remember when Russia was taken off of SWIFT, that was a huge hit to their economy. Will other countries start sort of, I guess, insuring themselves with their own transaction platform between central banks, between other banks, so they don't have to rely on an international system?
It's possible. I know that there have been talks, and, as of right now, this isn't what we have, but there is a term called a central bank digital currency, which is where essentially they would literally make their own currency. It wouldn't just be a payment system. There would be another, digital currency that would be used. I don't know necessarily between which parties would have access to that, but I would not be surprised at all if we saw countries implement their own CBDCs.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Shall we wrap up?
Yeah.
All right, so thank you everyone for tuning in. As we said, this is our first episode. We want you guys to make sure to stay tuned for the new things that we have coming down the pipeline over the coming weeks. But I hope that everybody enjoyed, and I hope you gained something, even if it's a little bit, of new information from what we talked about today. And we hope to see you coming back in the future.
And also, just to add on to what you were saying, if you guys are interested in any topics that you might not be familiar with, but you want to know more about, feel free to let us know as you're watching, and we'd love to, research them, talk about them, and cover them on our time.
Yeah, for sure. Anything that you guys want to know. Like, we'll do the research, we'll check everything out. Just let us know what types of stuff you'll be interested in, and stay tuned for the next podcast. We'll talk about it.
All right, over and out.
Boom.
Boom.
Pretty good.
We kept it a buck.
We did. Always keep it in a buck. I think that came out pretty well for a first podcast.